guys are making me cry. I'm going to do an excerpt from my solo show, Liberty City. Kindergarten, age 5. It was the 70s. I had an afro and a nose ring, all my father's doing. My daddy was this slickster, streetwise intellectual. You know, the one that sounds like a hustler, but he's talking about Marx? His friends were in the movement. We went to sit-ins. All the kids had African names. There were 20 Kwame and Nkrumahs in my nursery school class. Kwame! Everybody turn around. My father would talk to me about great Africans as if they were people who lived around the corner. Come here, baby. See this picture? Joseph Sinkay. The boat was called the Amistad, and he took it over, and they kept the white people alive so they could run the damn boat. Okay, Daddy, then what happened? They got to the point. Joseph said, who is the man in charge of the law? He told him his village, his father, his father's father, and how he was illegally captured against the rules of war. Plus, in the picture, he is fine. I was like, oh, I love Joseph Sinkay. My father had decided that I would go to an all-white, exclusive private elementary school so that I could learn the tools of the enemy. So, I have an afro, a pierced nose, Lord & Taylor dresses, and $85 stride-right shoes, because if you're going to be with white people, you got to have on your best clothes. And we had just watched this special on PBS about the Dahomey people in West Africa, and my mother's family had traced my great-great-grandfather back to the Dahomey. So my dad was like, see, now this is why your features are like this, because we Dahomey. So we just learned about the Dahomey, and we had show and tell. This is kindergarten. And this kid named Gunther got up. Gunther had recently come to Miami from Austria, and he had lederhosen and platinum blonde hair, and he talked about his family making strudel. And I was like, I'm from someplace else too. I would like to share. And I stood up and I said, I am from Africa. I grew up in a small village. It was originally bigger, but now it is smaller because of slavery. And Mrs. Green was like, where in Africa, April? We're Dahomey from Benin. That is in West Africa, near Togo. It's near the coast. And Mrs. Green was like, so, what do they eat? And I said, rice. And what else? Different kinds of rice. And she called my parents, and she told them I had a problem with lying. This school calls me up, you say, we are concerned, your daughter has a problem with the truth. You call my job, I come to the school, principal sitting there with the teacher, no child, I said, I'm giving you all my goddamn money, is the child gonna be present? And Mrs. Green was like, well, we feel it's important to talk to the parents and establish a rapport. Well, the accused person, she'll be able to stand here and defend themselves if you got something to say. She's just a child. She's a person. And they brought me into the room. Hello, April. Hey, baby, how you doing? Why don't I begin? At Show and Tell today, our little Gunther got up and shared about his heritage, do you know, and some of his family's Austrian traditions, and possibly it seemed as if it were a heritage show and tell. Because afterwards, April said she'd like to take a turn at, April, why don't you tell your father what you said? I said I was from Benin, Daddy, from the Dahomey people. Yes. Well, I don't understand what the problem is. She told you where she was from. Did you think we just appeared here and waved a flag and people came and invited us into their homes? I told my daughter where she came from because no one else here is going to tell her except 1161 Northwest 38th Street. Well, we were talking about literally. Are you going to sit here and tell me literally that's not where my child is from? She's not from where you from. Well, we all know that April is not actually from Africa. Look at me. Where the hell else am I from? I ain't from here. I got dragged here in some chains by some folks that y'all know. Is that why we sitting up in here? Is that why we're here? Because she's from Africa? Well, Mr. Thompson, the child looked like she's from Africa to me. Where you got her from? Your house? You got some people related to you look like that? I think not. This is some bullshit. And Mrs. Green was like, April, did you lie? You know some people from Africa?
Yes, Daddy.
Who you know?
Joseph Sinkay.
Now, did she give you any incorrect information?
The rice.
Well, the Dahomey people do make a rice. And it's double grain, and they double bake it and put it in stews. The people of West Africa eat a lot of rice. They grind the damn rice. Now, she got the book, and she did the research, and she can tell you where she's from. Then why you sitting up in here trying to call my baby a liar? See, this is some racist ass bullshit. Don't sit here and tell me I don't know where I'm from, or my child doesn't know where she's from. She deserves an A for the lesson she just taught you. Thanks, Daddy. My parents were amazing hippies. And they were teaching me, by connecting my story of being this only little black kid in a totally white school to the bravery of an African teenager named Joseph Sinkay. If he could make America live up to the promise, well, I certainly can. I learned that day that Mrs. Green's story about who I was didn't trump my story. In her story, I was a liar and a loser. In my story, I was a historian and a descendant of the Dahomey nation of Benin. My story is the truth. See, that's the power of being the author of your own story. When somebody else is writing your story, there are limits, there are boundaries, there are shoulds and woulds and you're supposed tos. When you're the author of your story, there are no boundaries, no limits. The only boundary is the breadth and scope of your imagination. When I first became an actor, it became glaringly clear as I walked through the doors of NBC and CBS that their idea of what a black woman was an angry ghetto mother and a maid. And my great-grandmothers, who cleaned floors for me to go to Vassar College, were like, oh, hell to the no. You won't be playing maids. So it became glaringly apparent that I was going to have to make my own work so that I could see visions of womanhood that were realistic to me. One problem, I didn't know how to write. Or at least that's the story I had in my head. I felt this little black kid from the Pork and Bean Projects does not have the right to be an artist. I'm supposed to go to school, get a law degree, and get a good job with benefits, and buy my mama a house. That's the should. The one problem with that is the thing that I was good at was going to lead me to my life's purpose. But having this limitation of what I should do kept me from finding my purpose for a long, long, painful time. So not only did I have to learn how to write, but I had to learn how to rewrite my own personal story of who I could be. And in that process, I learned two things that if you don't remember anything else that I rant about today, remember this. What other people think about you is none of your damn business. What other people think you're capable of is none of your damn business. The only thing that you need to be concerned about are all the ideas that you have in your head that are stopping you from being who you're meant to be. I began a process, a very painful process, called what I like to call dreaming out loud. And as I do teach, and I coach kids, and I coach other artists who are like conflicted, and then I coach grown-up people who are like, I hate my job. And I'm like, oh, honey, you should be doing anything you hate. Life is short. So I taught them what I did. This process called Dreaming Out Loud. It has 3 stages. It starts with Julia Cameron's brilliant morning pages from The Artist's Way. 3 pages longhand without stopping. Complaining, hollering, whatever. The second stage, list making. And the third stage, asking the questions. Now, the morning pages, every time I came to the page to write, I would start shaking and sweating. I didn't think I had permission to write. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to show up for myself on that page. I'm not going to do it. Well, the morning pages are about staying on the page for 3 pages longhand writing without stopping. It teaches you to wander around in your world and not quit on yourself. And what you will find after several months is that they are filled with rants, prayers, supplications. Lord, help me, I hate my job, I hate my boss, I hate. And that's fine. The key is to stay there until something else comes up. What I learned from doing the morning pages is that I had a whole bunch of outdated beliefs about myself that were no longer serving me. I believed, well, I'm not very pretty. I'm sort of this chubby girl that's oddly cute, and nobody really pays attention to that. And the best thing about me is my brain, and I'm depressed, and nobody's going to love a brainy girl. And oh, my Jesus. I just went on and on and on and on. I shook out all the negative stuff because you have to dump out the negative stuff to get some real thinking outside the box stuff to come in. You got to dump. So the first 3 pages were dumping. And then when you go back and read them 6 months later, like I did, you look at that and you go, oh my God, if someone said this about my best friend, I would kick their butts. And I was like, whoa, we have to do something about redefining this set of negatives. Where did they come from? And I realized they came from my industry, you know, where people, if they eat a full meal within this decade, they might be punished. Where a size 10 is a big woman, and we got to go to the plus size shop. Or a size 8 is like abnormal. That's my business, where everybody's got Botox and fake parts. So much so that I go to a set and people are like, who did your work? I was like, my mama. But like, that's my industry. So I had to counteract that because I knew that's where these images were coming from. So I made a list of every fierce woman I knew. I looked at Mad Men and I was like, if Christina Hendricks comes out in that dress again, I'm gonna whip her. She is fierce. I put pictures of her all over my apartment. I watched Monique's solo shows. I read about how she started her own business. I put pictures of Monique up on the wall. Sophia Loren, Serena giving you skirt and what. I put up images that counteracted what the world was saying I should be. And it started to work. I started paying attention to the times and the places where I felt fierce and beautiful in my body. And I realized those times are when I was storytelling or connecting with another person, and they were seeing me and I was seeing them, and they were perfectly fine with their definition of who they were. They were beautiful. And that's what I loved about these women. Kate Winslet is my other one. I totally love her. Right? And so I was like, yeah, I'm becoming somebody new. I'm getting okay in my body. All right, I'm buying a sexy dress. 3 months into writing those morning pages, reality starts to go, you're a liar. That's not true. What the world thinks is right. You fat. You ain't going to get a job. Blah, blah, blah. You're going to play a maid. And I was like, woo! No. I defy you. So I started list making. Every time a negative thought popped up, 100 things I love, 100 things I'm proud of, 100 things I dream about, 100 things I think are beautiful, 100 sci-fi novels I love, do not laugh. I wrote every time I was sitting on a set and went into a costume fitting where the diva looked at me and was like, oh, honey, we have to go in the back and get something else for you. We don't carry this size. And I was like, whatever. I can act. Serena. I wrote the list that kept me alive because the only other option was to buy what other people were telling me my limits were. And if you're listening to other people's stories, you spend your life trying to measure up to that box. And it's exhausting. And what's going to happen is people are going to start to challenge this new you that's showing up. And of course, that happened immediately. And you can't let that go by. Because every time someone challenges what you've been working on, it chips away at your soul. Right? And it becomes their story is more important than your own. And you only got 80 years here. You got to make this thing work for you and get rid of the shoulds. So the next step that I learned was that when people challenged the new person I was becoming was to ask questions. Now, the first set of questions are when people were telling me who I should or should not be, right? I do speeches and stuff all over the country, and I talk about my work and blah, blah, blah. And people are always saying, oh, you're too smart. You're actually from the ghetto. People from the ghetto won't understand what you're talking about. I was like, I'm from the ghetto. Are you saying there are no intellectuals in the ghetto? Okay. Or people telling me, well, you know, racism is this and racism is that. I was like, you know what? Part of rewriting my story is, yeah, all those bad things exist, but who am I right now? Because I've got a list of everything that I'm good at, and that's what's happening right now. And the good things are happening more than the isms. Because if I still keep defining myself by the isms, racism, sexism, genderism, I'll be exhausted, and I won't find my purpose. So I focused back on the questions whenever who I was or some sadness came up. For instance, I was reading an article in 2009, this off-duty cop, he was African-American, witnessed a robbery, and he called back up, you know, and he was in his plain clothes, he wasn't at work, and he ran after the suspect, and when the uniformed police officers arrived, they shot the cop dead because they had a boundary, us and them. Perps look like black men. Perps don't look like cops. Imagine being in the shoes of those 2 white police officers who shot their black fellow officer. That's crappy. Boundaries suck. And when you are trying to redefine yours and pushing up against the stories that people have about you, you're going to be challenged. Stay the course by asking the questions. The first question, what are you pretending not to know? And don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. What are you pretending not to know? If you knew you were going to die 1 year from today, what would you do and what would you want to be remembered for? If there were no limits and you could have everything and do everything, what would you do? When I answered those questions in the morning pages and went back and looked at them, I had a whole bunch of excuses of why I wasn't doing the things I was put here to do. I realized I love epic stories. I love stories about people being swirled around in huge political events like the riots, which is what first play is about, or people in movements being forced to become political and having to take a stand because something is wrong. I love stories of sci-fi because in sci-fi, we actually allow human beings to be good people and show up for each other. I love La Mágica Diaria, which I write about in my new play. I love magic and everyday life. I think it's amazing and it needs to be celebrated. And I knew that from writing these lists and all of this stuff, that that's what I was supposed to be doing. I didn't know how I was going to get there yet. But what I had deduced is that I want to write a play and a screenplay about every decade in Miami's history, and then I want to get it produced. I have no idea how this is happening because I have 17 jobs. I'm an actor, writer, producer, teacher. I'm a lot of stuff. That's not important. What's important is that I spent 5 years writing in those pages what I'm supposed to be doing here. So as long as I put one step in front of the other and do a little bit of that each day, I'm good. I was in the South Florida Black Archives doing research for my new play, Good Bread Alley, about my great-grandmother in 1926 Overtown. And I was describing to the archivist my great-grandmother's house. You know, it was green and white, clapboard house on stills, and the corner store here. And I was like, oh, we paid the bill here at the pharmacy. And the archivist was like, you too enthusiastic, quiet. He put on his gloves, he went into the other room, and an hour later, he came back with a picture of my great-grandmother's house in 1911. And then he pulled out this magazine article, and it was a picture of my great-grandmother walking down 2nd Avenue in the 50s, wearing the white straw hat that is now sitting on my altar in my apartment in New York City. You could have knocked me down with a feather. I started crying, and the archivist was like, child, calm, calm. The next day was my last day in the archives. The entire staff came in, all the archivists, the secretaries, the cleaning lady who kept bringing me Cuban coffee and pasteles, and I was like, I love her so much. And they said to me, all right, Miss Thing, now you are our archivist. You tell our story. We helped build this city. You tell them we was here and what we did. Now go on. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly why I was here. And I knew that that was my destiny. That night I went home, and I wrote Good Bread Alley in one night because it had been burbling in the morning pages for years. I took out those black and white composition books and I looked for stories. And I lit my great-grandmother's candle and I listened to my Afro-Cuban grandfather's stories and music and played Celia Cruz and listened to Shango and I wrote the play. Because they were there going, hello, come on girl, this is your job. And I knew that in the moment that I was doing it, it felt good because I was doing what I love. And I learned that from writing the morning pages, making the list, and asking the questions. Because 500 years from now, when they open the time capsule and they ask, who were those brown Americans at the end of the 20th century? They can't open it and find bling bling, black women with Botox, bleached skin, and blonde weaves. That cannot be the final story on a people who taught America the meaning of civil rights. That cannot be the final story on a people who allowed their children to be hosed, bitten by dogs, lynched by the Klan, to march down the streets and fight for civil rights. That cannot be the final story of a people who arrived here on their knees and within 150 years put a black man in the White House. That cannot be the final story. Because we did that, all Americans. Good, bad, or indifferent, whether you like Barack or not. Black people, white people, Asian people, Latino people, we got together and made a decision. That's phenomenal. 150 years, we did a turnaround. And I come from a people who taught us how to do it. It's my job to write their story. What's your story? What do you dream about? What's your heart's desire? No ifs, shoulds, limitations. The sky's the limit. Write it down. Make the list of what you love. Ask the questions. And listen to your heart. Your heart holds your dreams. And dreams are life's fuel. When there's no more dreams, there's no more life. Listen to love's heartbeat. Listen. Life is everywhere, waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be celebrated. Thank you.